So modernism was a trend that affirmed the power of humans being able to make and improve and reshape their environment. This was sort of a time where there was a culmination of knowledge, technology, and practical experimentation. So modernism refers to the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century when there was sort of a shift in political, cultural, and artistic movements. So that is what modernism, the terminology, covers. It was also a time where the art and architecture, music and literature, and applied arts became more progressive and thinking a little bit more rebelliously against the earlier academic and historicist traditions. So they were trying to encourage the growth of the economy and the social political aspects of modern life. It is by the artist Joseph Binder. This was for Fortune magazine. A lot of his design focused on the reduction of geometric forms, contrasting color, and the psychological impact of colors. So we're starting to see artists aware of using specific colors to evoke certain emotions in the viewers. His clients also included American Railroads, American Airlines, A&P Iced Coffee, and also Graphis, which is another magazine. He was made the U.S. Navy art director and designer in 1948. And in the year 1927, he founded, along with a few other people, the National Austrian Designers Association, which was called Design Austria. And he also has an award now called the Joseph Binder Award. So this Joseph is Viennese. He was originally trained as a lithographer, and he definitely won a lot of awards for his work. He founded his own studio called Vienna Graphics, and he was an artist and poster designer. He also wound up coming to the U.S. as a guest lecturer at the Chicago Art Institute and the Minneapolis School of Art. So his work contained a lot of influence from Cubism and Gestalt. And so a lot of the stuff we're seeing is a mixture of the styles. You can see the cubism here. You can see that the buildings, the skyscrapers are reduced into geometric shapes, but when put all together, they create the dimension, and they also sort of form a Christmas tree shape just by being in the vertical pose. So I thought that was really, really clever. And you can also see the Art Deco influence in this piece. The image is very crystalline, and you're seeing the stars sort of alludes to the expressionist design in the piece as well, as the book mentions. It is by Alexei Brodovich, who was an art director for Harper's Bazaar in 1938. So this man contributed a ton to the magazine. He was also seen as a huge pioneer in graphic design. He introduced European modernism of the 1920s to the United States, but he also commissioned artwork and photography from leading European artists, including Salvador Dali, Cassandra, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and Man Ray. He believed strongly in visual vitality and immediacy. He also had an enormous obsession with photography and used a very expressionist approach in his work. As you can see in both the text and the photography on this page, he was very interested in working with white space and figuring out how that balanced into the work as a whole. He was very interested in having very balanced layouts in his work. He believed a lot in using change and contrast. His work is easily recognizable, but he did not intend for it to be so. He kind of just, I think he's one of those people who had a sense for design. He didn't necessarily have a good description of what made it successful, but he just, knew it when he saw it. And there's a lot of simplicity in his work as well. In this image, when it was published, he printed the photograph over the gutter, so maybe this would be the middle point of the magazine where it would fold, but the picture went over into it. So I thought that was a very interesting design choice. He did use the Bodoni serif type, and what is so beautiful and elegant about this is that he actually used the type to mimic the curves of the model wearing the dress in the photograph. This is a silkscreen print for the Federal Art Project under the branch of the Works Progress Administration. Artist Richard Flotho. Artist was one of America's premier graphic artists and book illustrators, and he worked in styles ranging from realist to expressionist to surrealist. And as his last name would suggest, he is born in Essen, Germany. He trained as a printmaker, and he worked at art academies throughout Germany, including the Munich State School of Art, the Bauhaus in Weimar, and the Dortmund Art School. So yeah, he studied color theory with Vasily Kandinsky and design with Paul Klee, who both influenced him permanently. So he did a lot of work for the FAP, and he definitely was really good at exposing America's public to art. So this division created a lot of different governmental agency projects. They created 2 million posters from 35,000 designs on anything from public health to education to wildlife conservation. So he was really into stylized forms and bold lettering in the typeface stencil, which we're not seeing here, but he was also definitely one of the first people to promote serigraphy, which is what I mentioned before, the silk screen. So everything in here is quite stylized with a very minimal color palette. The piece itself is actually only 14 by 22 inches in dimensions, and silk screening actually wound up being a lot cheaper than creating color lithography. So basically this allowed them to print a lot more things, up to 500 posters in a single day. So I believe silk screening is where you take a very taut piece of silk and you push the inks through it to create the image using a stencil. So back to the soft plaquette style. I hope I'm saying that right. So this was an illustration of a panther joined by a very simple decorative text. So everything is very flat, but you do get a sense of dimension right here, how the body goes in front of the text, and kind of you see the tail kind of looping around, so it almost looks like the text is floating between the tail and behind the body, so it kind of gives it a sense of dimension where the tail is whipping around. Also very nice mixture of fonts. I like how the font in Visit sort of mimics the design shape of this panther here, especially like up in the tail. And just a very, very limited color palette. Again, we're kind of seeing those Japanese colors, the very Japanese minimal color palette characteristic of their woodcuts. This is from the artist Karkin. This was also from the FAP in the Chicago division. So yeah, it's very interesting use of color. Like the only time that you see the green is around the eyes. The color of the font in Brookside and Zoo is the same color as the tongue or the inside of the mouth. So it's really tied together very well to make a very strong image. Very color balanced. And just a very bold image, no space in the background indicating any sort of setting or any sort of background just kind of floating in space. You got something representing the zoo, you just have one animal, so very, very sac placat. And I definitely continue to really enjoy the Zaf Placat style. I think it's just very bold, very graphic-y. I think those would make great posters to kind of hang up in your house. Um, I don't know. I think it's very attention grabbing. Is by Martin Weitzman called Foreign Trade Zone Number One from February 1937. This is another silk screen. Very, very Art Deco. I love this number one right in here. It's just super Art Deco um, in sort of the way the dashes and the E's were kind of lowered down, sort of a stretched out looking font, and then you have this one kind of stretched almost in the wide way. And then we've got the O here. It makes a perfect circle. Um, so this is a very non-threatening image. Sort of another style based on Cassandra's purist work. And what you're seeing here is the bow of a ship reduced to just a flat plane with pretty much no shading or gradient to speak of. And the image is running off the frame. Um, and this was definitely vertically proportioned lettering. You got that stacking going on, and everything is stretched to sort of create a rectangle right here. So very carefully organized to mimic that shape, sort of something that we were seeing back in the Art Nouveau, Art Deco eras. This is an interesting use for a government message. It wasn't necessarily created in a style that they thought Americans would have responded to, but because of the people who issued it, because it was government issued, it kind of helped set the pretenses for that. This image, very iconic. This is by Lester Beale, Rural Electrification Radio, 1937. Um, so this is a super limited color palette. You got white, black, blue, and kind of a muted brick red. Oh yeah, finally we have a Missouri artist that we can talk about a little bit. So he was born in Missouri and he moved to New York City in 1935. He was a freelance graphic designer. So what might be kind of obvious right off the bat is that he used a very patriotic color palette. We've got the red, white, and blue in here, and we've also got stripes, kind of mimicking the stripes in the flag. So I don't know if you picked up on that initially, but that was definitely intentional. We're seeing just flat planes of color, but the white arrows pointing towards the structure, they really do give it a sense of dimension as well as the shape right here. So it kind of does look like, we're almost imagining a little box, even though we have just enough information to make out what this image is depicting. A little bit of a Zaf Placat influence. This poster was created for the REA, and right now electrification of America, especially during the rural, or going towards the rural areas, this was important to become prioritized. We're now like in the time period of the Great Depression, so this was sort of a way of kind of upgrading the standard of living for all of the Americans, especially struggling with the economic crisis of the time. So a lot of government agencies were able to give electricity to the rural Americans and kind of help them out a bit. So these posters basically were almost meant to emphasize the importance and the benefits of having electricity. He's got radio waves depicted as these large white arrows, and they're literally sending their energy and their information into the house up on the right in the background right here. So even though it's smaller, you got these kind of seem to come from like an infinite place. So sort of like the collection of all the information kind of going straight into that area. And so, the point was just to illustrate where you can improve the quality of life.